Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you the top 10 best Ark PVE tames, so let's get straight into it. In at number 10 we've got the Stegosaurus, and come on, this is one of those creatures where it's like, oh my god, this is such a great one for PvE, and it is actually pretty good for PvP as well, with obviously all of its turret soaking abilities, but well, we talked about that today. It's a PvE list, not a PvP one, of course. With this thing, they're just a really well balanced berry gatherer, and yes, you could say trikes are really great as well, and parasols are really great, but I've never really liked them as much as the Stego, and actually this is the only berry gatherer that I've really decided to put on this list. There's one more, but it does a lot of other things apart from berry gathering, but you know, this is the only main berry gatherer I've actually put on the list today because it's not the biggest part of a PvE player's life, just gathering loads of berries up, but it really does help out a lot to have a creature that does berry gather, and the Stego is definitely one of those. The Theory I will also give a brief honourable mention here as well, as I think it deserves to be on the same spot as the Stego. The two gatherers you're going to want for like plant-based things are the Theory and the Stego. Yes, you can use the moss chops for organic poly and all of that, but the Theory is great at gathering fibre, like the moss chops as well, so you could give that a brief honourable mention, but I personally don't really like it as much as the Theory, and the Theory is very useful for the dragon boss fight on top of that too, so the Stego and the Theory are going to be the two creatures that are in at the number 10 spot today. Next up, we have got the Yeti, and I just really like this as a general creature for my PvE playing, not just obviously for the use in boss fights, which, you know, it is commonly what it is used for, and that's pretty much what everyone does use it for its courage roar in boss fights, and you'll bring a Daedon along as well, although that's not going to be on the list because I don't really think they are as important as the Yeti. The Yeti has a lot of advantage over it in my opinion because it just generally does a lot more, and if your creatures are strong enough you shouldn't need to heal them up anyway along the way. But I find this creature again is just a really good all-round general carnivore. You may also be surprised that you're not going to be finding the Rex on the list. I just find that there are better boss creatures out there than the Rex, and it's sort of been overtaken away. Even something like a Yeti, you could bring loads of Yetis into a boss fight, and a lot of you have been saying you find them a lot harder to tame than the Rex, and I would say that to some extent, especially considering the biome, but I've never really struggled with taming the Yetis at all, and I can get a nice high level breeding pair with relative ease, and then just breed tons of Yetis, and the Yeti army is there, because I would rather have an army of Yetis than an army of Rexes. The Crystal Wyvern I found is often just not talked about in a PvE just aspect or conversation in general, and the reason for that is probably because the map is slightly more obscure. Not everyone is out there on Crystal Isles, especially considering it's not in ASA, but these creatures really are, in my opinion, better than the normal generic wyverns, and people seem to talk about those all the time. I just prefer their elemental abilities, and they are far easier to tame, no questions asked. If someone says down in the comments below that these are harder to tame than a normal wyvern, you're wrong. I'm sorry. These are just so much easier. You only need to be level 60, and Note Run is ridiculously easy. You'll have no troubles doing that whatsoever. Then simply trap and knock out Crystal Wyvern to get that Primal Crystal, and then it's passive tame. Basic as just like that. And if you want to be really sure that you don't fall off, you can always have a grappling hook on you and just grapple onto it as well. But if you actually get into the right spot on its back, then you should be fine and you won't need one anyway. They just really are, in my opinion, a lot easier to tame than the Wyvern, and you get all of those Wyvern features, if not even better, considering the elemental abilities are better. My personal favourite is Blood Crystal Wyvern. Comment down below what your favourite Crystal Wyvern is. I've heard the Ember Crystal Wyvern is quite a favourite among many in the PvE community. In number 7, we have got the Shadow Mane, and come on, this is just such a ability jam-packed creature from Gen 2. It deserves to be on the list, although not as high as some of the other creatures, as they've been around for a lot longer, and they also do spawn on some more accessible maps, are much easier to tame, and you know, there are other rationales and reasons for them being higher on the list, but the Shadow Mane really does need to be on here. As well as a PvP player's dream, it is also a PvE player's dream. They are fast, quick, agile, and they can traverse huge distances over very short periods of time. Just look at how high this thing can jump. They also have the hydration buff, same as the Crystal Wyvern actually, although that's pretty useless why it has one, and they can utilize the pack buff on top of that as well, and go invisible too when both a male and female are present, and they're really great swimmers on top of that as well. You've just got so much versatility with a creature like this. It really is worth just getting one and using one. The only downside, of course, is the absolutely painful taming method, but I'm sure the benefits really do outweigh the negatives of said method. Now, I'm sure we all know the Desmodus, and it really is one of those creatures where, come on, you're going to be using it in a given PvE scenario as long as you've gone on field at some point and actually managed to tame one. They obviously use the same tame method as the Bloodstalker. Those blood bags are what you're going to need, and if you get a low level one first, which is definitely what I'd recommend with this, you're barely going to need any, really. Like if you're going for, like, I'm talking ridiculously low level, and then just farm those blood bags and get the high level which you've just been hoping for, and then maybe stash that lower level one in your base in case maybe you die out on an adventure and you need to get back on something. It's always nice to have some spare flyers. Obviously they have the glide ability, but their main use is Sanguine Elixir. 30% of your tames are done with a simple click of a button, and obviously their blood bag farms. They also can go invisible in the nighttime on top of this too, but I chose the wrong biome for this where there's no nighttime cycle, so I couldn't show that for the sake of today's video. Generally also they are great flyers with a lot of mobility on them, and they will get you everywhere that you're going to need to go. In at number 5 we've got the Argentavis, and this has really carried me through a lot of my Ark playing. The RG has always been there for me ever since right in the olden days when I started actually using these things, and I'm not sure with the chronology of abilities and when things were added, but nowadays they have a smithy as a saddle. They have a nice regen buff. They can carry 2 creatures at once because they can carry one in their beak and one in their claws, and they can carry a very wide variety of creatures on top of that too. Their weight reduction on metal, crystal and obsidian is just so well received. I really can't use it enough. Like all of those metal runs I've done with the RG compared to something like a Pteranodon, it is just so much nicer to use. And obviously they do not have any kind of speed advantage compared to something like the Pteranodon, but I tend to actually turn on flyer speed leveling, but still, even at the base speed, they are very usable. But you know, I'm very much an advocate for flyer speed leveling, so I'll keep that there. But as always, the PvP players just taking it to the limits. I'm not just going to blame it all on you though, because PvE players did go a little bit mental, and it did make things a little bit more mental. But you know, at the end of the day, Ark's quite a mental game, so why don't we keep it a little bit mental? I guess, you know, cheaters and things like that. It's actually kind of sad, you know, all of the Ark cheating problems, but it sort of does happen with every game. A bit more extreme with this one though, considering the bugs are absolutely everywhere. But anyway, let's continue. Some people might get a little bit angry about my choice of Bloodstalker in at number 4. I simply love this thing for underwater travel, and traveling is a big part of my PvE playing. So from my preference of PvE playing, this is a very useful creature for me, and I sort of need one nowadays. Like, I'm just like, if I'm gonna go anywhere in the water or do any of those underwater caves, even if I'm on the island, I'm hopping straight over to Gen 1, getting a Bloodstalker and coming back with one before even stepping foot in the oceans to do those caves, or just generally traversing the oceans to go to underwater caves and things. I know Megalodons exist and I could do it with a Basilow quite easily, but sorry, I just love the Bloodstalker for underwater travel too much. It is so fast, it is so agile, you can see all the aggros of the creatures. It can also skate along the top of the water too, and that is just something which you really do miss if you're on some other creatures that are obviously underwater based ones, and I can't not have it at this point. You could say I've been a little bit spoilt with a creature like the Bloodstalker, because there are again a lot of other great ocean creatures out there, but I just simply don't use them anymore, and this is the only one that I use. It also actually deals a reasonable amount of damage, especially if you level it up too, and on top of that, the downsides to any underwater creatures are when you're out of the water, you can't use them anymore, whereas the Bloodstalker, you can keep using it as the water as well, and it is just a really fast, agile travel mount on top of that everything too, so you really can't undermine it for everything that's got going for it, because it really does have a heck of a lot going for it, and it's the same tame method as the Desmodus. If you get yourself a Desmodus too, then you can be pumping out Bloodstalker taming, and I just love taming and using these things as underwater mounts. In number 3 3, we've got the Baryonyx, and at the end of the day, this really is just the best PvE cavern creature. You could argue the Shadowmane or something like that, but it is just so well known, and you know, it's on the island, so everyone really can just start using this thing straight away, and once you've got one, you're never really going to want to turn back. They are small, fast, agile carnivores, which can also jump as well. You know, if you want that Mario style dinosaur, they can actually have a spin attack on top of that in the water. So I guess Mario Galaxy, but the Baryonyx. I don't know why I'm referencing this, but let's continue on, I guess. They also have quite a hefty amount of damage for a carnivore this size, which obviously you would expect is going to make it a great cavern creature. If you think of doing the artifact of the Skylords, don't bother taking one of these things. That cave is too small for pretty much every creature you'll find in the game. Possibly you could get a saber in there if you really tried, but you'd have to use cryos in a lot of sections. It's simply not worth it. Do that cave on foot. You can see that spin attack there, the Super Mario Galaxy energy. And you can see it stuns creatures up to the size of a Megalodon. Don't try anything bigger than a Megalodon because it simply will not work. But you'll probably have the damage to take them out anyway. Either way, they're just really nice, small, agile, nimble, great, small carnivores. Don't know why I said small twice. They're really great for caving and they're great for PvE. Then at number 2, we have got the Maywing, and this creature is here because it is the epitome of travel. Yes, the Bloodstalker is my all-time favourite underwater mount, but this is just my all-time favourite travel mount, and it's actually not too bad of a swimmer as well. It can glide along top of the water as well. And I do maybe occasionally use this for short little dips, maybe out of my base if I'm building in the underwater caves on the island or something similar to that, or if I'm just briefly going through something and I can't be bothered to switch over my creature, because they are obviously the epitome, like I said, of flying creatures. They're not technically flyers, they're gliders, but still the speed and agility you can get with a creature like this over such long distances, no matter the gradient or elevation, is insane. And that's sort of where the rock drake falls behind a little bit, in my opinion. They don't work quite as well for just general or travel, and also they do spawn aberration, and they are, you know, a little bit harder to tame than the Maywing, considering this thing's saddle was unlocked at level 18. You can simply trank it out with a few tranks, and obviously just use some signs to trap it. It is such a cheap tame and so useful. They can also gather berries as well. This is the other berry gatherer, quote unquote, that is on the list. And obviously they're portable feeding trough too. You really do need these things for PvE if you're playing Ark Survival Evolved. If you're playing Ascended, tough luck. And in at number 1 is the Deinonychus. This always will top my lists for the best PvE Ark creatures, unless something comes out which is just so insanely small, nimble, yet insanely powerful that it manages to top this creature. But so far, still nothing has, and I'm confident nothing really will. They take no fall damage and have a lot of agility. On top of that, they can deal bleed damage to bosses, and as far as I'm concerned, they're the only creature that can do that, as they can grapple onto them and just absolutely tear them to shreds. They have the pack buff on top of this too, and although yes, they're not great in the water, that's not what I'm using these things for. I'm using these things for general travel and boss fights. And if you actually were wondering about the lack of boss fighting creatures on this list, it's because basically all of those fights can be done with the Deinonychus. I wouldn't really do the extinction boss fights with something like the Deinonychus, but that is such a minority in terms of the scale of all the Ark maps. I decided not to include any creatures that might be good for said boss fights, because for everything else really I can't think of any other exceptions apart from the Moda. Actually, maybe the Master Controller, you'll want something with a little bit more health, but still with some health mutations you can get through it on alpha with absolute ease. Then they're the only scenarios where you probably wouldn't be using one of these creatures. But for everything else, they are just the perfect, the ideal, and nothing really does top them. On top of that, in the general world, they can scale up any kind of wall or vertical surface with absolute ease. You'll have no trouble traveling around the map with these things, and obviously they're so small and nimble and agile. They're not really going to get stuck on a lot of things too, which is generally nice. They are just the best PvE Ark creature. The top 10 best beginner Ark tames, and that means just if you're new to the game, not if you're early on in the game. In at number 10, I've decided to put the Carnotaurus, as I find this is really an effective and useful creature to have in your roster. It is just so nice and very easy to tame. Yes, you could say the Aloe is a great one as well, and I'll give it here as a spot on here, sorry, as an honourable mention. But I find the Kano is just the better creature for me, but I'll let you decide that for yourself. What is the better creature for you in terms of ease of taming and just the overall size of the creature and mobility and damage and health, and all of those factors really do play in. And for me, the Kano is always the creature which I'll go for. Feel free to disagree in the comments down below. I do not mind if your opinion is different to mine. But for me, again, the Kano is just the one for me. Compared to the Aloe, I vastly prefer the smaller size, and I like just having a smaller carnivore. I also find they're easier to tame as well, just by a little bit, because trapping them is easier considering the Aloe usually does spawn in a pack. Although in ASA that's less apparent because baby versions of the creatures can spawn, and it's pretty much the same in terms of difficulty. The only real difference is the Kano is still slightly easier, as killing a Kano is a little bit easier than killing an Aloe, especially if there's some others about as well. But you know, there might be some other Kanos about in this instance too. The Kano also does the bleed ability, and I like the amount of mobility it has. I can feel reasonably stealthy and quite good with myself while traveling around and demolishing loads of creatures around me with this thing, and that is why I really like it as a beginner Ark tame. Next up, we've got the UT, and although you might not be thinking about bosses quite yet, I find this is a really nice one if you are new to the game, as yes, maybe a Rex is something which you go for, and a Rex is something which you definitely can, but I find the UT in most places is generally just a better carnivore to use around the map. The Spino is a great option as well, but I find the UT is the easiest option to tame out of those three, and you still got that courage roar and the fear roar, tons of mobility and a lot of damage dealing. They are just really great carnivores to run around the map with and use all across Ark. They are very sufficient for all of your big carnivore needs. Their stamina is good, their health is good, their weight is good, their damage is good, and obviously they've got those abilities as well. So, you know, they're even nicer to use, and they're better at swimming than the Rex. I know you're probably not going to be using these things as underwater carnivore, but I find they really are not the worst for that job, and if you need to cross some sections of water, you won't find it too difficult to do that with the UT. Next up, we've got the Stego. You can either really choose between this, the Trike, and maybe the Parasaur, possibly a Diplo or a Bronto as well, although this is my preferable one. Also, sorry about all the flickering in this B-roll. I should probably re-record it when ASA sort of fixes itself up a little bit, because yeah, it wasn't doing the best when I was recording this, and shadow flickering was very commonplace in the game. It still really is on the island. Not really on Scorch, because there's a lot less trees about and generally a lot less shadows about, or maybe the issue's just fixed really on that map. The Stego obviously has gone through some TLC for release, and since it's been released, sorry, in the early stages of the game, and it makes it even better, because if you're a PvP Ark player, then even if you're new to the game, you could possibly do some lower level raiding with one of these creatures. You can get into the high end ones as well, but turret soaking with this thing on maybe a kind of mid-tier base is going to be something which you can do solo with one of these creatures, obviously by using the, I think, hardened plate is the one for turret soaking. The heavy plate is good for gathering wood, and the sharpened plate will gather you all your berries and things like that, which is what I would use it for from a PvE perspective, and obviously that's what I mainly use it for as a PvE player. Then at number 7, I've decided to put the Pteranodon, as well, yes, they're going to be really great views to being a tame. I find there's some better ones out there. You may have put this higher, and that is totally acceptable, but this really, for me, deserves to be in the number 7 spot. No higher or no lower. It is a very easy fly to tame. Probably the easiest kind of really good traveling mount out there to tame, just apart from one creature which has actually made it right the way into the number 1 spot, because I find it's better and it's even easier to tame than this thing. The only real difficulty is the map that it spawns on, but still, as a beginner Ark player, you might have access to those maps and might not, and you can differ this list depending on what maps you have. But I am contributing all maps into this, but mainly kind of focusing on maps like the island and those 3 DLCs, because, you know, in theory, most people are just going to have a lot more playtime on those, and they're going to be playing those first, or just generally playing those because they don't have the other maps. The real difficulty for this is the saddle. The chitin or keratin can be a little bit difficult to get. I find go with chitin, it tends to be easier. Just kill any kind of insects that you can find around, the small ones like the Titanomira and the Meganeura, and you'll have a good time with getting that chitin. You can obviously get it through keratin as well from the carb enemies, which are the turtles you'll find on the beaches, but go through insects because you'll get it done a lot faster, and obviously they take a lot less time to kill. I wasn't really quite that knowledgeable back in like 2015, 2016, but at least I do know that now. Obviously the Pteranodon is very easy to tame. Bowler it, and you'd use a club or some tranks. Club if it's a low level, tranks if it is a higher one, and then saddle it up and you get yourself a fast, agile fly, which can be used for both PvE and PvP scenarios. The Thyla maybe you wouldn't think of as a beginner tame, but trust me, if you take your precautions properly, you can get this creature tamed properly, well, and efficiently. If you have yourself access to the Thyla saddle, which I think is in the level 40 or 50 range, as far as I'm concerned, you can obviously check that as well. Then this creature is really going to be just great for you to have, as the trap can be very simply made with some wood and then simply trank it out when it's in the trap. Obviously look for one on the rubber trees. You'll probably want yourself a Pteranodon as well, or just a flyer to get around. You can do it on foot with some other creatures, but I find a Pteranodon is quite an easy and effective creature to use to tame one. Then once you've got it into said trap, then trank it out. Obviously make sure you've got some armor on too, at least chitin really, because you don't want to be killing yourself in a scenario like this. Put some sleeping bags down if you're not sure if you will survive, because they're going to come in real handy. So you don't have to go back all the way to your base, and you might not have another Pteranodon lying around, so it's going to be a long while until you get back to the redwoods, and that Pteranodon might die as well because you can't get back to it in time. But then once you've tamed one, you've got yourself one of the best, if not the best creature really on the island, just for everything in general. Obviously it's no berry gatherer, but it still can deal with the bleed ability, and it can climb any kind of wall or vertical surface. It is extremely mobile, and generally an all-round great caving and carnivore to have in your roster. It is an amazing creature, and I really do like people that use a creature like this, and I like using a creature like this. It really is a good one, which actually, if you prepare for it, beginners can actually do it with relative ease. In number 5, we have got ourselves the Baryonyx, and this is going to be the best caving creature out there for you. Yes, I said the Thyla was good. The Saber can also do some stuff as well, but the Barry is really going to be the one you're going to look out for when it comes to caving. Again, you might not be thinking about that yet, but trust me, get one of these things, they'll be great for caving. They have the health, stamina, and agility to get through those things, and on top of that as well, they are the right size to fit into all of them, really, apart from the artifact of the Skylord Cave. Don't even try bringing any creature into that. You're going to have to do that one on foot. They also just are great creatures for general mobility around the map as well. They can get a lot done when it comes to travel. Not quite as much as the Thyla, but they can jump around, and they are really good swimmers, which the Thyla really can't justify. Also, I do find they're a little bit easier to tame too. Their special ability while underwater is the fact that they can do a spin attack, stunning creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, and that makes them really good for the underwater caves as well, which again, you may not be thinking about. Don't know why I said it twice, but either way, yeah, you might not be thinking about that yet, but trust me, that time will come at some point, and it's just better to prepare first, and you can still use these things for a great traveling mount and combat creature. Next up, I've decided to put the Crystal Wyverns on the list, and yes, the Wyvern does deserve some attention and a lot of respect, but if you do have Crystal Isles, which is a free DLC, obviously Raasclark is as well, so you can have access to the Wyverns for free, then hop on Crystal Isles and get yourself some Crystal Wyverns. You do need to be level 60, so get yourself a note run done. If you don't know how to do that, look up, there'll be some similar tutorials online for note runs that you can do on Crystal Isles. Trust me, it will be easy, you'll have no issues doing that whatsoever. Then get yourself some trank arrows and probably a sufficient trap to trap one of these wyverns. Then obviously you're going to knock it out and get that primal crystal. Then find a crystal wyvern which you'll find to be the most desirable for you. For my preference, it is blood crystal wyverns, but you might like the emerald crystal wyverns or the tropical crystal wyverns more. Just pick whichever one is most appealing to you. Then there's a specific spot you can go on its back, kind of where you would ride it, and get onto that spot of it, and then just press E and it's going to start passive taming, and you can just stay on that spot, and then every time it tells you to feed it, keep pressing E, and then eventually you'll tame this thing. Make sure you have enough primal crystal though, because that can be a little bit of a difficulty. Always use the app Dodo Dex if you're unsure of what you're going to need for taming. It's not going to be the most accurate thing in the world, but it will give you quite a good assumption for what you can expect. So overestimate that a little bit and then you should be fine. But yes, they're the wyverns, but just so much easier to tame, and I find their elemental abilities are even better, and they're not really difficult to tame. In number 3, I've decided to put the Deinonychus. Again, you might not think of this as a tame that you can get quite early on as a beginner, but still, these things are really easy. Go onto Valguero if you haven't already and get some of these things spawn in the Chalk Cliffs biome. I'm not actually sure what spawn point it is, but it's the biome that looks like this. I'm pretty sure it's quite central. It's sort of near the big lake that's in the middle of the map. Then you're going to want to find yourself some Deinonychus nests. Kind of make sure you have a grappling hook, or actually you can just kamikaze, go in and then try and run out, and then wherever you die, then just pick up your body from there and get out and go to your base. Then just put some torches around this egg and raise this thing, and then obviously have sufficient meat at the time to bring this thing up. They really aren't very difficult. You don't have to worry about imprint and all of that yet. They're not going to be used for boss fighting when you're first getting them. Once you've got that saddle though, you can really use these things as great carnivores to travel around the map with, and once you've got a nice breeding pair, you don't have to worry about taming them this way anymore. And then obviously you can worry about imprints and all of that when you start getting these creatures ready for doing your boss fights, as they'll have a better chance if obviously they've been fully imprinted, and it's just going to help their stats all round. They also take no fall damage, which is just great for their traveling, and like the Thyra, they can scale any kind of wall or vertical surface. They really are good tames for traveling, and I love them for this use. And considering how easy they are to tame, for all you beginners out there, really go on Valguero and tame one of these things, because you will definitely not regret it. And you can always just transfer it onto whatever map maybe you're trying on a little bit more, because Valguero might not be your main map at your time. In number 2, I've decided to put the Argentavis, as I find this is just generally a really great creature all round. It has a variety of abilities, and generally it is one which you can find abundantly across the island's mountains, and it is just going to be a go-to. You may not consider it as a beginner tame again for the saddle level, which I think is 61, something around that, but trust me, with note runners you can get there pretty quickly, and you can still be a beginner to the game and get into the level 60s. Then once you've got one, which can be done with a very simple trap, I advise you to use a trap, and then you lure it in, and then you obviously close the trap off. Trank this thing out, you can just use a crossbow. You don't really need to worry about the long necks for even things like that. You don't really need to worry about the long neck for most things, where you can still use trank arrows right into the late stages of the game, but it's advisable, and you can even get into shocking tranks too, but trank arrows will do just fine for a tame like this. And then you've got weight reduction, things like metal, crystal, and obsidian. They can carry all kinds of creatures, as well as that their smithy axe as saddle, making them really great for traveling to places where you're going caving. Just carry your baryonyx in the claws of the RG, take it to wherever you need to go for whatever cave you're doing, and then when you get out, if those ultra fluids have damaged any of your armor, then you can simply just repair it in the RG. Also, if your RG is low in health, you can always eat something, and not in your inventory explicitly, but just eat a dead creature, or just kill a creature and eat it once it's dead, and then you're going to get yourself a nice regen buff, and it will definitely come in handy. And at number 1, I'm deciding to put the Maywing, as I find, considering its saddle is unlocked at level 18, it is absolutely insane how good this is as a glider. And yes, you may not have Gen 2 at your disposal, and that is perfectly okay. You can always moderate the list and get something like the RG or the Crystal Wyvern or the Deinonychus for all of those needs, but I just find they are just so good at gliding, I do have to warrant putting them in at the number 1 spot. They're the best travel mounts in the game in my opinion, and they're so easy to tame. A few signposts, you just trap them in a position, and then boom, like that, just give them couple of trank arrows. The saddle again is unlocked at level 18 really early on, and you can have yourself this amazing creature, which is in my opinion again the best gliding creature in the game. They also are really good swimmers as well, which you might not expect out of these things, but when you could kind of think of them as a platypus, it sort of makes sense. They also do act as a portable breeding trough as well, so maybe if your Deinonychus needs feeding early on, you can get yourself that Maywing to feed it. Obviously you can just put meat in its inventory, but you know, I'm fleshing it out a little bit. And on top of that, they can gather berries too, like the Stego, but they've just got so many other nice attributes that I really do have to put them in at this spot. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you will have enjoyed, as I definitely enjoyed making this one. As always, comment down below what is the best beginner Ark tame for you, and if you didn't agree with this, then put your 10 in the comments below, and I'll see you all later.